All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. People may be popping on and the recording is going. So welcome to our first in the 5-part series of Transition to Adult Life. I'm Beth Reel. I'm here from the Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center. And just a few logistics. I don't know, for those of you who weren't on, if you move your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, you can, hopefully a section will pop up where you can find a chat feature. So type any questions in there. I'll be checking it periodically to make sure that everybody can still hear me and that things are working well. I just want, if you have questions as we go along, the best way to handle it is to type your questions in or to write them down. So the format of the presentation will be, I'll go through the PowerPoint presentation that I prepared, and after that, then I'll look at the questions in the chat box. I'll look at the questions on Facebook. And from there, I would like, if we have time, I'd like to open up the mics so we can do some dialogue and some questions and answers. So a couple of things about this presentation. Well, first of all, for those of you who don't know, I think most of you know who the Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center is. But we are Connecticut's Parent Training and Information Center. So we're funded by the federal government to provide support to families who are or may be navigating the special education system with children with disabilities. So our services are for families with children from birth to 26 years old. And we provide that support through telephone consultation, emails, outreach at different organizations, and outreach transition fairs, things like that, and through presentations throughout the state. If you haven't had a chance to look at our new website yet, the web address is actually on the screen. It's been up for, I think, about a month now, and it's really pretty and fun and new. So please go take a look at it. It may take a little challenge or a little getting used to on how to navigate the new website, but all the information is still there. My name is Beth Reel, as I said, and I am the transition coordinator and the youth advisory board coordinator for CPAC. And I also am a parent of two young men, one that navigated the special education system and transitioned. He's 26 now, so it's been a couple of years. So not only do I work in this field, and have worked in this field for a very long time, 17 or 18 years, something like that. But I also have this lived experience with my son. So, okay, just getting information saying that they couldn't hear us, but I think they can. I think people can hear us now. Okay, good. So, yeah, so this presentation is a brief overview because it is a webinar format, and we don't like to do 2-hour webinars because that's a long time to be on a webinar. And so it's a basic overview of the laws that guide special education, and specifically transition, secondary transition in particular. So I'm just going to check the chat box real quick. Make sure we're all good. Looks like we are. All right, so let's get going. Okay. So in this webinar, I hope that you have a better understanding of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, also known as IDEA, and what IDEA has to say about secondary transition. And then also the second part of the presentation will be information about the regulations in Connecticut. So Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, also known as IDEA, has been around since 2004, has not yet been reauthorized, but that's okay because we don't necessarily want it reauthorized right now. And this is the purpose of IDEA. This is the whole point of why we have special education, why we're doing what we're doing. So you'll notice at the end, I have added some bold. So the whole purpose of IDEA is to prepare students for further education, employment, and independent living. So that's not specific to the secondary transition section. That is the whole reason why we have special education. So from the time children enter IDEA, wherever that may be, whether they are, come into it right away, or whether it takes some time for them to become eligible, this is really what we're doing. And it's very easy to lose sight of where we're going. But I highlight this, and I often will send families this quote so that they can bring it into meetings or just use it for their own personal use around why we're doing what we're doing. And so, is a student prepared for further education, employment, and independent living as they are exiting school? So this is what IDEA says about transition services in particular. And so I provided the section numbers not because, and I provided them pretty much all the way through, not so we can go around quoting section numbers, because we don't really find that necessarily helpful. People don't know the section numbers. But if you'd like to look it up yourself, and take a deeper dive into some of these laws. So the information that I'm sharing is the basic information. Sometimes there is a little bit more guidance that's offered in the law. So that's a little bit about the section numbers. So transition is supposed to begin not later than the first IEP to be in effect when the child turns 16. So that means typically that the IEP, the PPT meeting that the district has with the family and student when they're 15, the last one they have before they turn 16, transition planning should be put into place. And that means that a lot of the conversation around what we're doing, what goals are going to be created, should really be filtered through the transition lens, if you will. Someone a while ago coined that term, the transition lens. And so everything we're doing at that point, up until the student graduates or exits school, should be filtered through the transition lens. So you'll notice that I, again, added bold to the section that says, or younger if determined appropriate by the IEP team. So that's a really important part of the law that's often not known, not looked at. Although more and more frequently, it's actually pretty exciting because more and more frequently I am seeing school districts that are starting to plan for students when they turn 14, which means generally that's the end of middle school, and that's a really good time to start planning. At one time in Connecticut, the transition planning age was actually 14, and it made a lot more sense because at that point you're thinking about, where is this child going to go to high school? What classes are they going to take? What classes might they be exempt from? So that is a very important statement. And we've had some changes in Connecticut that I will address when we get to the Connecticut section. But I just always want to point that out because that is for every student if it's determined appropriate by the team. And that means that families can bring this up to the team. So keep that in mind as you're either working with families or you're supporting your own child. All right, I see a chat. Just make sure everybody can hear me. Yep, Tom is saying this is important, especially with the many choices of high schools now available. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. You guys could probably see that. I probably didn't need to read that to you. But yes, I absolutely agree. So IDEA goes on to say that the IEP must include appropriate, measurable post-secondary goals. In Connecticut, we call them PSOGs or post-secondary, hold on a second, I don't want to mess up the acronym. Post-school outcome goal statements, post-school outcome goal statements. So it's PSOGS. Because in Connecticut, we like to change the name of things. So you'll notice that right above in the highlighted section, it says by the IEP team. In Connecticut, we call it the PPT team. We're the only state that has a PPT team. So just know that the IEP must include these post-secondary goals. And I'm not going to go into a lot of depth around the post-secondary goals because we will dig into that further in the webinar about the IEP. But I just wanted to mention that, you know, that this is part of the law. And so the post-secondary goals should be based on age-appropriate assessments. We'll also go into assessment in the IEP webinar. And we look at these areas of post-secondary education, employment, and independent living when appropriate. And so you'll notice that that mirrors the purpose of the law. And so often you will hear people say post-secondary education, employment, and independent living, because those are really the areas that we're focusing on. And then we also need to look at the course of study or courses of study needed to support that student to achieve those post-secondary goals or to be prepared to achieve those post-secondary goals. And so again, that goes back to, you know, planning early at the end of middle school so that we can think more about that course of study or those courses of study. Okay. Oops. Okay, there we go. Just want to make sure I didn't skip one. Okay. So IDEA defines these transition services as a coordinated set of activities that is designed to be within a results-oriented process. So oftentimes when I see an IEP, it doesn't have connection. So we have these goals and objectives that don't necessarily connect to the needs of the student, or we have activities going on that don't necessarily connect to the goals. And so that's really where we come back to in IDEA. And then we want to focus on the academic and functional. And I've added the underline and bold in that area. As we want to look at the academic and functional achievement of the child. And the reason why I added and functional is because for quite a while, we had a trend going, and I still see it, it's not as much as it used to be, of students who had achieved academic, you know, all of their academic credits, they did quite well in their courses, A, B students, that were graduating and receiving their diploma, which means that they no longer receive special education services and supports from the school district. Yet these kids were not functional. They were not able to do things on their own. So some of these kids were going off to college. They weren't able to get to school without significant support from their families. They may have achieved their academic goals, but with significant modifications. So in college, maybe having to write a 10-page research paper, and in high school, the modification was they only had to write a 1-page research paper. Well, that person is not functioning at the level that's necessary to enter into college. And so I will not go on and on about that, because we also have a webinar coming up about transitioning to college. And if you do have a student that is thinking about college, it's really, really important. The dropout rates are significantly high for all students, and even higher for students with disabilities. So functional is a big part of what we need to look at. And so continuing on, IDEA outlines that we should be preparing students to go on to all of these different areas. And so this is not a complete list. It's just the basics that IDEA lists, with a few things added, but preparing students to go on. And then those coordinated set of activities, as I mentioned, need to be based on the student's needs and looking at the student's preferences and interests. And so there's a lot about that in the IEP presentation as well. But we really need to be thoughtful about what and how we are creating goals, and what goals we're creating, and do they actually match what the student wants to do and the student's interests. And so here are many areas to look at. Many times we're not looking at all of these areas for kids. Again, I think it's better because we've had some information come out from the state around looking at more than just academics. But here's this, and again, it's not a complete list, but it's a general list so that you can see the range and the variety of areas that we really should be looking at for students. So in Connecticut, in every state, but in Connecticut, we have the PPT, the Planning and Placement Team meeting. And during that meeting, we develop goals and objectives around transition, just like we do as the student, if the student has been in special education for their school career. And if the PPT meeting is being held to discuss transition, then the student must be invited to attend. So that is, again, part of IDEA. And one of the things that we often say in our general Transition 101 presentation is we hope that students are not just beginning to attend their PPT meetings at this age. So either 14 or 15, or whenever transition planning begins, based on what the team decides. We really hope that students have been allowed to practice skills in a PPT meeting, and that can look like a variety of things. And so just briefly, oh, excuse me, I have something running in the background. Just briefly, one of the things students can do is come into their meetings at the very beginning for maybe 5 or 10 minutes and read a previously written statement. Or they can come in and talk about it. I know a teacher who actually has preschool kids. If it's appropriate for them, not all students can do this, but you have to think about what's appropriate for them. have preschool students come in and hold up a picture that they've painted or a craft that they've made or something like that and talk about it in front of the team. So if we think about the skills that a student is building when they come to a table with 5, 6, 7, sometimes 15 adults sitting at the table, depending on, sometimes those transition from one school to another. Meetings can be rather large. And that student has just a few minutes to talk about whatever it is that the team has decided that this student will talk about. That is developing self-advocacy skills at a very young age. So I always say I'll step up off my soapbox now, but I think we're waiting way too long to get kids into these meetings. And so then the families that I talk with that have students that are in high school that have significant anxiety or are just done with the process, they don't want to go to these meetings. And I realize that sometimes it's not appropriate. Sometimes we have very adversarial meetings where it's just not appropriate for a student. But I am probably preaching to the choir about getting kids in there younger because of the nature of this presentation. But it's something to think about if you're working with families or if you have younger kids that also have IEPs, really getting them in sooner. But the law requires that they must be invited to attend. That means they get their own invitation mailed to them, and the family should receive their invitation as well. So this says the same thing, and if the student chooses not to attend the meeting, then the district is still required to gather information about their preferences and interests. So that can be having a conversation before the meeting. That could be the student writing something that someone else reads in the meeting. Lots of different ways to take the student's interests, needs, and preferences into consideration. Okay, so let's move on to the regulations of Connecticut state agencies. So this is information specific to Connecticut. And so this first slide just indicates that Connecticut special education laws really mirror IDEA. And so IDEA cannot be changed. The protections that are offered in IDEA cannot be changed by states, but states can offer more or additional protections over and above what IDEA says. So, and then this just talks about how Connecticut has changed the term IEP to PPT meeting. So some general graduation requirements, because graduation is always a hot topic. So many years ago, the regulations were changed because for a long time, students weren't able to participate in graduation ceremonies if they weren't actually receiving their diploma. And so best practice started coming out, and the State Department started saying, it's okay. It's okay for students to actually participate in all of the graduation activities and the graduation ceremony, even if they're not receiving a diploma, if the IEP determines that the student, that the PPT meeting determines that the student is not going to receive their diploma. And so this is kind of a big thing because there are a lot of kids out there that perhaps are going on to an 18 to 21 program to continue to receive support because they're not yet prepared for post-secondary education, employment, and independent living. But they're very resistant because they think, I can't, what do you mean I can't graduate with my class? What do you mean I can't participate in graduation? It's a deal breaker for kids. And so luckily we now have this in the regulations in Connecticut that yes, indeed, a student can participate in all of those activities. And, for many kids, you would never know that they are not receiving a diploma. So there's the graduation party at home. They walk across the stage, they get, depending on, a lot of schools don't hand out the diploma. So, it's just that they don't receive that in the mail. There's some provisions for actually awarding a general education diploma to students who go on to 18 to 21 programs or are placed by school districts in other programs. That was an issue for a while because students would be placed and then that particular program doesn't, if they didn't actually award a diploma, then that student would not be getting one, and it was a real problem. And then the provision that education should continue through to the end of the school year in which a student turns 21. So if a student turns 21 in January, the program continues to the end of the school year. And the school year is defined as July 1st through June 30th for those purposes. And so if a student's birthday, they turn 21 on July 1st, they can receive services through that entire school year. If they turn 21 on June 30th, they are not entitled to services or eligible for services, no longer eligible for services. So those June and July birthdays get tricky. And so students can receive special education services through the age of 21, but this is a PPT decision. It's not a guarantee. I often will be out talking with people and they will, you know, demand, well, you know, my child has the right to receive services until they're 21, and they don't. It's a possibility, but you have to, again, go back to the purpose of the law. Are they prepared for post-secondary education, employment, and independent living if appropriate for that particular person? And if the answer is no, then perhaps they need another year of schooling. Some students only need 1 year. Some students need more. So it's very, very individualized. It's not a guarantee. And this is probably one area that we receive the most around the end of the school year. We receive a lot of calls around this issue. So transfer of rights: when a student turns 18, the rights automatically transfer to them. It does not matter what their diagnosis is. And so unless a person has gone to the probate court and received guardianship or conservator, those rights transfer to that student. The district must notify both the student and the family that this is going to happen 1 year before the student turns 18. So in Connecticut, back in 2013, we received some information in the regulations stating that the student can, even if so not all students are appropriate for guardianship or conservator, but they want to have help making educational decisions because they don't feel comfortable with that. And so our regulations now state that a student can do that. They can appoint someone when they turn 18 to continue to make educational decisions on their behalf. And as it says at the end, it can be revoked and a student can receive help to write the information that needs to be written to assign that person the right to make decisions on their behalf. So this is just the middle part in italics just says that, you know, it's just a little blurb. That's all it has to be, is just a little paragraph saying that the student gives, usually it's the parent or guardian, permission to act on their behalf. So it's very simple, and they sign it. And then I suggest that they bring it and have it added to the file that goes to the school, and then also have them add it to the permanent record at the central office, main office, pupil services office, depending on your school district. And then they also want to update that annually, every year, having, you know, just changing the date and having that added to the file. And then, so there are some students that parents have not received guardianship, and there is this section that talks about, you know, they're not able to make educational decisions on their own, and they're not actually able to sign something to say that they assign that decision-making power to somebody else. And so this is just a brief little extract from the regulation. So if this is something that you're interested in looking at, please go to that section and read it through. But it just basically says that if two separate professionals determine that the child is incapable of providing informed consent, then someone else can be assigned that consent. And then most recently in Connecticut, we have an act concerning students with autism spectrum disorders, with the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorders. And it just basically says that students with that diagnosis, it's now required to begin transition planning at 14 with those students. So that actually takes the planning back to where it originally used to be before they changed the law. And so again, you know, it's possible to request transition planning for all students at that age, but this is now a requirement. So I just wanted to share that. Several years, at 2015, there was a program review and investigations committee concerning transition services for youth and young adults with autism spectrum disorder. And this committee is a legislative committee that interviewed everybody that they could talk to in the state that had anything to do with transition and students with autism. And so this is the link to the entire write-up about this investigation that happened and what their recommendations were. So the link to the entire recommendation. And it's very interesting, but what came out of it with regard to education was they said that information needed to be shared annually with families that had students with autism, information specific around transition. And so our State Department decided that they would just create this transition Bill of Rights for everyone. So it's not specific to students with autism, but that's where it came from. And so if you're not familiar with this, when I send the information out about the recording, I will make sure that this is included, and it's available on our website. It's available on the State Department of Education's website. And it really goes through many of the things that we've already talked about today, but the rights for families and students with disabilities when it comes to transition. And so actually the link here is to our website. It's available in English and Spanish. And districts are required to provide this to families and students annually. So that is the end of the information that I wanted to share with you today. Here are some links to information that may be helpful. And I'm going to check in because I did see a chat pop up. So let's see. Okay, so there are a number of options outside of guardianship and conservatorship for adults with disabilities. It's great. This is in the regulations, but there are other options, including powers of attorney and support. Absolutely, Tom. Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. I've actually been thinking of doing a webinar on this as well. It's not in this series, but yeah, there are supported decision making is a big one. There are a lot of different things that we can do. Guardianship and conservatorship are not to be you know, taken lightly. They're you know, you go through the probate court to appoint them, and so people should be very thoughtful about it. It's not appropriate for everyone, and it is appropriate for some. So yes, thank you for saying that. That's fair. It's definitely an important consideration. And Irene, if we feel that we aren't getting the right transition coordination at our school, how do we get an advocate to help us? So one of the things that we do at CPAC is we can help, first of all, have a conversation about what's going on. So you're welcome to call our telephone number and ask to talk with someone about transition, and just, you know, see, okay, what are they doing? What are they not doing? Are there things that we can help with and, you know, suggest that a parent can do first before going the advocate route? You know, CPAC is here to support families. We believe that families are their children's best advocates. That being said, we understand that sometimes this is much more than the family can handle. And so, you know, sometimes they need that extra support. So sometimes we can help guide you. I've helped many families with language, and, you know, even bringing in a copy of the purpose of IDEA, you know, can sometimes help. And then other times it doesn't help. And so we can help you find an advocate that would be appropriate. My suggestion also is to find an advocate that knows transition and knows the law, because not everyone does. And there's a lot of people out there advocating for things that are actually not appropriate. So you really want somebody who can advocate from that place of knowing what is appropriate in the law. Okay. So Tom, did we see what you said?
Yeah, so I don't know. Well, I'm there now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, no, so I just, when I put those other posts on there earlier chats, I realized I popped them up just to you. So not everyone could see them unless you click on that little 2 button there.
Got it.
And you can change it to all panelists and attendees. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay.
That's all.
So I need to click on something? Is that what you're saying?
No, whoever's typing in needs to click on that too if they want. Like, you read another one from someone, but I didn't see it. So if you want everyone to see it, if someone wants everyone to see it, they need to click that little 2 button to go all panelists and attendees for everyone to see it. That's all. They weren't seeing mine either.
Okay.
That's all.
All right. So let's just pop over to Facebook to see if there are any questions there. I can hear you. Hi. Okay. I don't see anything in particular there. Now you will all see how tech savvy I am not. There we go. Okay. All right. And so if there aren't any, let's see if there's another question in the chat. Okay, so Barbara asks, what would be available for an 18 to 21 program? My son is 17 and a senior in high school, but I do not feel he's ready for college. Good question. So there are many different types of 18 to 21 programs in Connecticut, and it's really important to find the one that is appropriate for your son. So one of the places that you can look is on the State Department website. So we at one time had a guide of 18 to 21 programs that CPAC helped the State Department put together. Actually, we sent out surveys to all the programs that we knew of. And it was wonderful, but as we all know, everything becomes outdated so quickly. New programs, I mean, the number of programs that we have now in comparison to then is significantly different. And so right now, the best thing we have is on the State Department website. It's under EdSite. And what I'll do, because you have to click through about 3, 4, 5 different places to get to it. So you click through and you can actually get to the listing of transition programs in Connecticut that have been vetted by the state or connected with the state. They have to fill out some forms to get connected with the state. And so I have everybody's email address, and so I will send you the path that you need to, the things that you need to click on to be able to get to that list. And then I don't know if it's been added yet, but they're working hard to update all of the websites for each program. So you scroll through, you look for programs, within a reasonable distance from you, and then you can take a look at the program and see, okay, does it look like it's something that would meet my son or daughter's needs? You don't really know until you go to visit, but and then there's usually contact information up there, so you can call them, see if they have an open house. This time of year, several of them do offer an open house, so for many of them, you could go check them out. Some school districts have 18 to 21 programs. We're seeing more and more school districts that are looking to connect together to create 18 to 21 programs. Together, smaller districts that only have a few kids, and so maybe 3 or 4 districts work together to create that program. And then, looking at a program that will actually prepare your son or daughter for employment, post-secondary education, independent living. A program for a student that is going to a traditional college that doesn't offer all of the supports is going to be different than a student that maybe doesn't want to go to college, just wants to go into work. So I hope that helps answer your question, Barbara. And I will add that link and send it out in an email so you can take a look at that. And then I want to try to unmute everybody. If anybody has questions, okay, so I'm gonna allow you to talk. We can just talk if anybody has any questions. So if you have a question, there's a little picture of a mic. Let's see if I can actually unmute you guys too.
Yeah, in the lower left corner of your screen, there should be a little mic that pops up that's unmute.
Yeah, so for some people I can do it, other people I can't. So if you have a question, either type it in the chat or unmute your mic.
Or there's the raise their hand button.
Or raise your hand, yeah. Okay, I have to raise my hand. Oh, somebody raised their hand and now it's not there. Tom, were you raising your hand?
No, I was just demonstrating.
Oh, okay. All right, so nobody has any questions, then that's the end of the information that I have prepared today. If you find that you do have a question, you're always welcome to email me. My email is B as in boy, REEL at CPACinc.org. Or you can email CPAC and they can forward it to me. And you're always welcome to call. And I just want to share a little bit more information about the Transition to Adult Life series that this is a part of. So this is part 1. On November 26th at 9 o'clock, we have Transition in the IEP. That should be a fun one to do in a short webinar series, but I'm going to do my best. Short time period. And then part 3 will be December 17th from 7 to 8 p.m. And that will be Connecticut Resources Guiding Transition. So we'll dive deeper into the Transition Bill of Rights. We'll look at the documents that the State Department has put out and the documents that CPAC uses the most with families. January 14th is Transition to Work. So I'm hoping to have someone that actually works for the Department of Labor or one of the workforce boards come and do that presentation with me. And then part 5 is on February 11th, Transition to College at 9 o'clock. And Dr. Cherie King from Central Connecticut State University will be here with us, and we'll be talking about preparing students to transition to college. If you have students transitioning to college, it'll be a really important webinar for you to see. And then if you have suggestions, like the alternatives to guardianship and conservator presentation is a really good suggestion and a very important one that people have a lot of questions about. So if you have other suggestions, I'm open to them, and I'm happy to prepare some information to share with you. So I want to thank you all for coming on today. And
one last question, Beth.
Yeah,
real quick.
Yep.
Sorry. So just when you archive this, just so I can share it with other parents, it'll be on CPAC's website, or where will we find the archive?
It will be on CPAC's website. So as soon as I figure out how to do it, to be quite honest,
that's fine.
yeah, I think what I'll do is everybody who's signed up, I'll send it out to them, with the PowerPoint presentation and the Transition Bill of Rights. And then, yes, we will be adding it to the CPAC website. I want to, have it there so that families can go and look at it, for years to come.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. This has been great.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.